Hello and welcome everyone. This is Type V3 with a robot Damashii review of the Crossbone Gundam X-1 full cloth. And I'll be honest, I know nothing about the Crossbone fiction, but pirate-themed robots always manage to melt my icy skull heart. Now, despite this being the full cloth version, we'll start with a look at the naked mobile suit. From a glance, this robot Damashii is a superb representation of the X-1's simple design, and a lot of it comes down to details. The mobile suit itself is primarily white and navy in color, yet sharp applications of yellow, gray, and red paint help to emphasize particular sections of the body. Furthermore, the bold panel etching gives the toy a mechanical feel. The real highlight, however, is the fact that there's almost no sign of bare plastic. Every surface has either been painted or given a matte finish. It's an aspect that affirms this toy's premium status. The only visual negative is the backside of the Crossbone's thrusters. They're somewhat bland by comparison to everything else on this action figure. Black lining or silver markings were a missed opportunity here. It's also worth noting that the figure's proportions are slightly super robot-esque, as opposed to most Gundam's traditional real robot form. As for the head sculpt, it's very nice. Again, clean paint and strong panel etching are the standout qualities here. Additionally, there's a second faceplate whose gold vented mouth is even more impressive. In terms of size, this figure is the common robot Damashii height of 5 inches. It's decent, though it will be too large to display alongside other 1/144th scale model kits. Overall, the Crossbone's appearance can be described as subtly fantastic. It isn't one that contains a singular standout feature, but rather it's characterized by multiple great elements. Articulation starts with a double-hinged ball-jointed neck, and the feather itself is also on a small ball socket. The torso has a waist swivel and a mid-crunch, which has some pretty good range in all directions. The arms are connected on a simple ball socket with a little bit of a swing-out functionality. The shoulder pads can independently rock back and forth, and the shoulders themselves can move in and out. There's a little bit of a bicep swivel, but unfortunately this little molded section likes to collide on the inside of the shoulder pads, so you can't really utilize that. The double-jointed elbow is nice, and you can swivel at the forearm. The wrists are also on a ball joint. Each of the hips are on universal joints. Now, range is okay. The front doesn't necessarily kick out all the way straight, and the side is limited to about 45 degrees. There is a double-jointed knee, and the ankles are on double ball joints, independent ankle armor, and the toe does have a small little hinge. The thrusters are pretty simple. Each one is on a small hinge, and the small little boosters can pivot back and forth as well. As you would expect, this robot Damashii is very poseable. The range of motion in the hips and torso was a little more limited than I would have liked. Still, all things considered, it's a relatively small complaint. This figure is enjoyable to pose. The Crossbone Gundam includes a robust set of accessories and features. We'll start by looking at the built-in weaponry. First up, the beam marker or beam brands. Located on each forearm, these can swing around in front of the fist for an attack. However, there's no included effect part, so the gimmick is a bit redundant. Speaking of redundancy, there's actual heat daggers stored inside the calves, but again, there's no blade attachment, making these useless. Then there's the screw drill feature included on the back hip skirt. It pops off, and yes, you guessed it, there's no weapon effect here either. I'm somewhat amazed at all the effort that was put into these meaningless gimmicks. Let's move on to the actual weapons the Crossbone employs, and first up, the Peacock Smasher. This crossbow-like firearm is fairly self-explanatory. It's a fancy gun. The sides open up for extra flair too. Strangely, you only get a single right hand for holding the weapon. Next is the High Muramasa Blaster along with 2 pairs of hands, straight and angled, for wielding it. As if the sword wasn't already cool enough on its own, you're also given some flashy effect parts. If that's not for you, pop out the secondary handle and use the weapon as a gun. There's even a blaster effect tip to emulate this. Finally, the side of the hilt has a replaceable panel with an included peg. This is simply for storing the blade on the Gundam's hip. Alright, with everything else out of the way, let's get to what's arguably the most important component to this figure, the full cloth armor system. It comes in 5 separate pieces, all of which are painted beautifully. However, it's not as easy as just pegging it onto the X-1. In fact, the Crossbone needs to go through some tedious disassembly. The white trapezoid-shaped panels on top of each shoulder pad must be removed in order to clip on the large skull armor. This can only be achieved by dismantling the entire shoulder. The chest area undergoes a similar process, with the front armor plates replacing the small white panels. Lastly, the torso's mega machine cannons are interchanged with ones that have a collar attached to it. Again, it's not a very fun process, and it's much lengthier than it needs to be. So what does all this part swapping get you? Well, for starters, one of the best looking mobile suits to grace the robot Damashii toy line. What's more, everything clips in securely, and there's no weight issues to speak of. Articulation is somewhat hindered, but thankfully each of the armor panels are on hinged ball joints, and these front sections here have a second arm attachment that goes out even further. Of course, that's not all, as the full armor system has its share of features too. The most prominent of these are the eye field generators and their swirly blue effect parts. They attach via a clear stem ball joint that mounts underneath the skull pads. Now, don't be fooled by the simplicity of this video. It's an infuriating experience. I had to take apart most of the shoulders to set this up correctly, and for as brilliant as the final look is, it almost wasn't worth the trouble. Moving along, the armor can open up for a more cape-like appearance, and yes, this is achieved by another exhausting display of parts forming. All four front panels detach and clip onto the back armor sections. Nevertheless, this is easily my favorite way to display the Crossbone Gundam, as it combines an imposing demeanor with maximum posability. The last feature this figure has to offer requires bringing it back down to its basic form and separating the eye field generators from the armor entirely. Then, with the use of special fists, the X-1 can wear the skulls as boxing gloves, effect parts included. Nothing more needs to be said. It's just cool. On paper, the robot Damashii Crossbone Gundam X-1 full cloth makes for one really great toy. After all, the presentation is gorgeous, articulation is satisfying, and the lush amount of features make for a multitude of display options. Yet, it's only in hand when the figure's true problem comes to light. That diverse feature set, the reason this release is so attractive to begin with, is almost a detriment to the entire package because of how poorly it's been implemented. It turns what should be an easy pick-up and play experience into a frustrating, time-consuming event. The honest truth is that the full armor Crossbone's design is plainly too complex for the conventional engineering methods used in the Robot Damashii toy line. Additionally, at $55, this figure is a bit more expensive than your traditional Robot Damashii release. Still, it's a fair price considering the amount of content in the box. Now don't get me wrong, I like this toy quite a bit, and would even recommend it to those with piqued interest. It's definitely a figure with a lot to offer. Bottom line, the Robot Damashii Crossbone Gundam X-1 full cloth is a great toy. Unfortunately, it's just not a very fun one. But that's all for me. Thanks for watching, and as if this release wasn't feature-rich enough, Bandai have announced an add-on set to give you even more little bits of plastic to fiddle with. Oh boy, that should be fun.